Evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a nice Friday night where we are. Oh, Marty's there too. Maybe Marty wants to play. We'll make him co-host as well. Or actually, Evan, I think you have to make Marty co-host.
Will do.
You have God powers on this. So Evan's still getting a couple things set up. While he's doing that, do a couple quick shout outs here. I know we mentioned this last time, but we have a handful of tastings up on our site. We're going to be adding more on Monday for our January, February schedule. But there's a few up there now, so I'll quickly highlight. We've got a Scotch Malt Whisky Society virtual tasting. Share my screen here for you. We've got a couple of in-person versions of said tasting as well. The 6 o'clock is basically sold out, but there's room at 8. We've then got, I'm joking about this because it's the third time mentioning it, a blinded by bourbon tasting that looks like we're sampling port in Portugal, but I assure you it's not. That's a blinded by bourbon. We've got a Glenfarclas family cast tasting with Deborah Stewart. We've got a 79 and an 83 in that lineup. And the 91, 92, 93, and 94 are all stunners. I've tried a few of them. That's going to be a baller lineup. And then for those in town, we've also got Holyrood tasting, and I wore my t-shirt today. We've got Holyrood arrival in store right now too, which is pretty cool. But we're going to be doing a Holyrood tasting with Rob Carpenter and Callum Ray. And then on the 25th, Burns Day, we're going to be doing a tasting about whiskeys based on a play by an English poet instead of celebrating Burns. But we are going to visit Burns on the Friday. So he just got bumped by a day. There's a rum tasting in there. There's a bourbon tasting in there coming up. That's virtual as well. Lots of cool things coming up this month. And as I said, as of Wednesday, Holyrood single malt now in store at Kensington Wine Market, which is pretty cool too. Evan, anything we need to say before I crack a window when we get rolling here?
So you mentioned the Holyrood. Did you mention the KWM bourbon coming in on Wednesday as well?
No, it's true. We've got a Doc Swinson's cast coming in.
Yeah.
Do we have info up on the web for that yet? Or
yeah, I'll put it up here in just a sec.
Okay. Well, while Evan is sorting that out, I need to start where? Day 11? We'll crack
so you do
pop a
that.
window here, see what's behind it.
And here's the Doc Swinson's up for pre-order.
Right. My box is starting to look a little more mangled. For those who don't know, I'm not cracking my box until the day of the tasting, so it's a pleasant surprise when I discover what we've got. And what we've got to start off with tonight is the Waterford Heritage Hunter, which is a whiskey that's got a pretty cool story behind it. They essentially revived an old strain of barley, which they then used to make this whiskey. And Evan, you might have more specific details than that, but I know it involved a greenhouse and many years of growing small crops of this just to get to the point where they had enough to plant a field.
Yeah, that's essentially what I have. I read their press release and quickly rolled my eyes at all the math and chemistry involved in it. But so I just essentially put that in the blog post and then talked around it. But yeah, pretty cool project with the Hunter barley. And of course, just working with one field, I think, on that one as well for this one, which is cool.
Yeah. So Waterford is an Irish distillery that has not made a big deal about its Irishness, which, we can talk about. And actually, I was chatting with someone about that today, about whether or not, as an Irish distillery, they're limiting themselves perhaps by not playing up their Irishness. Because I think Mark Grenier, the guy behind it, was previously behind Bruichladdich. Before that, an independent bottler called Murray McDavid. And you can see, if you look at Bruichladdich, some of the early inklings of where his head was going to go in terms of terroir and barley. And, I think it's interesting what they're doing. I've been to visit the distillery. I've been to see some of the farms. I think they're making great whiskey. But Mark kind of in classic Mark Renier style, spelled whiskey with it without an E, which most Irish distillers don't. Doesn't really play up the fact it's Irish because he thinks of it as a single malt. It's a single malt that's of a caliber that should be able to compete with single malts from Scotland and other parts of the world. But yeah, we'll see what people think about that and what they think about the whiskey. Evan, do you want me to share my screen for this, or you got that ready to roll?
Yeah, I can do that. Well, we're nosing away here.
Yeah. So it's named in honor of Dr. Herbert Hunter. And it's a strain that fell out of favor, probably for not having enough of a yield. But what they've done with this, after reviving the barley, they've grown it at Dunmore and Rathdowney Farms. 2018, the barley was then fermented for an impressively long 169 hours with Maori yeast. That is a long fermentation. And one other thing that's worth noting about Waterford that makes their whiskey unique, they have a mash filter instead of a mash tun. So they use the same technology essentially that most brewers use today for extracting their sugars. They don't use an old school mash tun. They use what's called a mash filter. And Evan, I bet you can name the other distillery, the only other distillery that until recently, actually there might be some other new ones in Scotland that have them too. But until recently, there was only one other distillery in the UK with a mash filter. And do you know which one it is?
It was Tea and Innick that we had on day 2, wasn't
That's right. And then what else do we need to share about this whiskey? Probably the cask makeup. Waterford matures a lot of their whiskeys in ex-bourbon, virgin American oak, ex-French wine, and then what they call Vin Doux Naturel casks. And Vin Doux Naturel is a bit of an interesting term for Waterford because it can mean anything from port and sauternes to presumably Banyuls, sherry. I'm guessing it's, just sweet wines.
Okay.
Wine. Yeah. So what do we think about this?
Just as we're nosing it too, one of my gripes with Waterford is they are heavy on the terroir to the point where they had to create their own word for it, which looks like terriers or something, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, they this is where they bizarrely incorporated their Irishness, because the word, the ancient word for Ireland is Irie. So it's basically Irie is, like, if you look at it, it's, I'll have to pull up their website to show people what we mean by it, because it is quirky. But yeah, for a place that doesn't play up its Irish credentials, they then had this clever terroir concept that they followed, and here I can share it. One of the things that is quite cool that they do, they're very transparent about their process. You can see the terroir code using blockchain technology, which is so hot right now. You can type in the code on the back of your bottle and learn far more than you ever thought you would need to know about the whiskey, including exactly which casks it was matured in, which farms, how long the fermentation was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting, but in some ways it sometimes feels like a bit too much. I want to talk about.
I think if it was we were doing a Portlandia skit, they would talk about the tags from the cows that had occupied the field beforehand as well.
But, and what did the cows eat before they fertilized the field?
That's right.
All crucial things that you need to know. The barley really comes through. It's funky. I mean, I suppose it has to be for something fermented for 170 hours. You'd expect there's going to be a certain funk coming off of it. And the wine cask, like, you're definitely getting some tannins and some spices coming from the wine casks.
Yeah, I coughed when I said terrier there or whatever, or terrier. But what I wanted to say is that, like, I love the idea of different barleys, but then they ruin the whole idea of having a control by tossing it in every single cask possible, and then making the makeup of the releases from that.
Yeah, and they're all cuvées. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's so true, because I think if you really wanted to compare the barley from one farm
Yeah.
to another farm. You'd put
Apples to
everything
apples.
in ex-bourbon,
Mhm.
fresh ex-bourbon, and then you'd bottle them in small batches as single casks, trying to compare barley strain to barley strain, like vintage to vintage, harvest to
Mhm.
harvest. 100%. But you know, I think that's one of the charming things about Mark is he does it his way, and
Yeah.
you know, you could give him a reasoned argument why you should do it a slightly different way, and he'll just keep talking and won't hear what you said and keep going with his own idea.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the picture that I used of him from their site on the blog where I put underneath says Mark Renier trying to decide if his next distillery product would be made from terroir driven aquavit in Norway or terroir driven ouzo in Greece.
well, I think either way there you could do something pretty interesting. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah.
So yeah, that of course is a joke because doing an Irish distillery after moving off of Islay wasn't enough. He does have a rum distillery which is doing some really cool stuff called
Yeah.
Renegade Rum, and that is it Guyana or no?
No,
Got
it's
it in.
in Granada.
Yes, thank you.
Granada, yeah.
But I mean, it's all very cool, but like at the same time, I think this is one of those characters, Mark Renier, I mean, who's a bit too clever for his own good. Like he's
Mhm.
got too many ideas. And I think part of the problem with Waterford is, you know, he got it just off the ground, and then all of a sudden he's running off to Granada to open a rum distillery and try to upend the rum industry. And I think what he needed was someone to say, like, Mark, we need to focus on this project.
Yeah.
But that's just not who he is. I mean, he's a visionary, he's an ideas guy, and I think people like that can be built up, but also torn down by their ideas because
Yeah.
you have one really great idea, but then you have another idea that's good too, but it distracts from or detracts from what you're already doing.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
the one good thing about that I would say is that he has, with both distilleries, seemed to have surrounded himself by some very, very smart and savvy people.
yeah.
So
Well, I was going to mention that, like, one of the great things about Waterford, I'm really hoping he's going to be in Calgary in February, but Ned Gahan, who's the distillery manager, and I believe he'd worked at the distillery while it was a Guinness brewery back in the day. He's an amazing guy, great sense of humor, very passionate about Irish whiskey and Waterford and what they're doing. They've got an agronomist named Grace, I think it's O'Reilly, who is like a firecracker and really passionate about what she does. So I think they're on to a kernel of something really interesting, but I think they're sort of suffering from what Bruichladdich suffered from in the late 2000s, which is too many ideas, too many releases, and they need some focus. And they need somebody to kind of take their great ideas, concentrate them into a digestible range of products and run with it. But
so not a Jim McEwen type character, you're saying?
but I think that's one of the mistakes about Bruichladdich is everybody thought these were Jim McEwen's ideas. I don't think they were. I think they were Mark.
Agreed.
Jim was just the showman. He was the frontman. He was the charismatic guy who traveled around and got people excited about Bruichladdich. That's what he did best.
Yeah. He was the first sort of rock star Scottish distiller where he had the personality of one.
Whereas, I mean, Kurt and I have talked about this before. I remember going to Mark Renier's office when he was still at Bruichladdich, and it felt like a punishment. Like I was in the office with him while he lectured us for 2 hours about Isle of Barley. And it was like a one-way conversation. And a lot of it was really interesting, but it was just shoving Isle of Barley down our throats, whether we wanted it or not. And the only thing that was merciful in that experience was that he had this little Jack Russell Terrier that was like biting my hand. And it was the one thing that got me through that experience.
Kept you awake.
It did. Hey, but we need to talk about the whiskey. What do you guys think about this?
Yeah. It's pretty cool stuff. Like it's got these a lot of things that I'm really looking for and really digging in whiskey right now, which are these like light style orchard fruit notes and a really nice amount of oiliness to it.
Yeah, I get some apple and pear, very interesting nose, and but a little bit of acetone, but for me in a good way. It's not making it, not giving it an off nose.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They definitely know how to use wine casks at Waterford. I think back to something Evan said, I just like to see a Waterford without wine casks. Like, can we just have like a bourbon cask Waterford just for fun? Um, you know, I just want to see like a naked Waterford without Vendu Naturel and, ex Grand Cru French Bordeaux casks.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, I think it's an interesting whiskey. I think it shows they're doing good things, but when you're releasing every single whiskey with a similar cask makeup, um, I don't think that you're offering something different. So I'd like to see a straight bourbon bottling. I'd like to see a straight, I'd even like to see a straight wine cask bottling just to see how it comes out.
Yeah,
But
the explosion of releases is definitely almost like a little bit of a detriment, which is too bad because they are doing some really cool stuff, and it's made it even difficult as someone that's selling the product to sort of focus on it at the same time. Um, and I'm very guilty of not having tried quite a few of their releases, including the peated stuff that's been recently released.
well, on the peated stuff, I mean, I think we were the only shop that got it, and there wasn't very much. One of them were nearly out,
Mhm.
and they're good bottlings. I've tried them, but I think Waterford got people really excited, and then people just tuned out at a certain point. And
Yeah.
Jeff was joking about ADD. Maybe that's cultural ADD, or where people just after a certain while they can't get excited about another release that's got the same roughly cast makeup as the last one, but it's from a different farmer's field. I don't
Yeah.
think the consumer cares.
Well, and maybe we're looking at the Renegade thing in a wrong way. Like maybe that was intentional on his team's part, where it's like we need him to be in another quadrant of the planet
Yeah,
for half the year, just so we can focus.
yeah, it could be. All right, I'm popping another window, gents. Let's see what we got
Sounds
here.
good.
It's fighting me. Old Forester Prohibition 1920.
Mhm.
Straight Kentucky straight bourbon, 57.5%. All right, Evan, romance
Yes.
me on bourbon.
Yeah. So Old Forester is kind of the uh, lesser known, at least right now, distillery from Brown Forman. When it comes to bourbon, Brown Forman is a pretty big drinks company. They are publicly traded, but they're also family owned. And the company also owns this little concern called Jack Daniels and another fairly well-known bourbon called not Waterford, Woodford Reserve. So Woodford and Jack Daniels, of course, get a lot more notice and attention than Old Forester does. Not that Brown Foreman is doing anything wrong in that case. It's just those brands are so big, and even especially when you're talking about Canada, Old Forester is so new that it's still a really fun bourbon to turn people onto.
Mhm.
So this is 57.5% alcohol. It's called the 1920 Prohibition. It's named after, well, they have a series of, I think it's 4 different bottlings that are named from different dates that are sort of big in bourbon history or in Old Forester's history. This one is the highest strength release of all of them and is meant to harken back to the style that they had around the time when they would have just been releasing stuff medically in smaller bottles via prescription.
All right. It's it's got some classic bourbon tones to it. There's some nice
Totally.
peaty notes, caramel. I'm getting a touch of hairspray though too.
Yeah, I can see that. Big cherry notes along with that hairspray note for me.
Evan, there's a note there. Thanks for including this as Ryan's B-Day whiskey, one of his all-time favorite bourbons.
Nice.
Yeah, there's some nice brown sugar in there. Pecan pie or pecan, I guess if you're in this part of the world, pecan pie. and like sort of kind of a molassesy sort of syrup.
Yeah, very, very brown sugar driven, a little bit of toffee and butterscotch, and that the brown sugar toffee and butterscotch just like flows over the palate for me on this one.
Yeah, it's big, it's spicy, lush, some nice vanilla tones in there, more of that butter tart pecan pie,
Mhm.
sort of a mustard custard molasses filling.
Mhm. Yeah, this is I talked about it in the blog post, but this is one of two bourbons that I try and make sure I always have at home. For the most part, beyond that, I'm pretty much just happy to have whatever small batch or single barrel that looks interesting
Mhm.
open. But I love Old Forester 1920, and I love that it's not too expensive for something high proof. The other one that I usually have around is Russell's Reserve 10-year-old, which is nice for something a little bit older that doesn't break the bank.
It's it's good for a bourbon from my perspective.
Mhm.
I know I don't have the bourbon tooth. I'm not a bourbon guy. I'm kind of tempted to like these flavors are like, I could make myself a cocktail, but not right now. Maybe
Yeah,
later.
it's not in a price range where you feel bad about putting in a cocktail. And that's the nice thing about the high proof too, is you don't need as much of it.
No.
Or
One,
you can put a lot in and still taste the bourbon after making the cocktail, which is
well
nice too.
that's what I would do, Evan. I'm all about flavor, and
Mhm.
if I'm gonna make a good cocktail, I'm probably gonna put a good bourbon in it. But yeah.
Mhm.
Marty, any thoughts?
Yeah, just nothing to add, just the big cherry notes and the bit of vanilla and the brown sugar just kind of standing out on the nose and the palate. It's
For sure.
it's quite nice. It's not bland. It's certainly standing up and showing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I find even at 57.5, it's not like this just fiery hot
No,
whiskey either. There's enough sweetness and creaminess in there to round out the rough edges.
Yeah. Adam and or Kate saying I'm not a bourbon lover either, but I quite like this. It's nice.
Right on.
I'm with you on that. It's always a pleasure to find a bourbon that I enjoy. I know I've given the shout out for Michter's many times before because Michter's is
Mhm.
a bourbon that I really like the style of. And I seem to remember if there was one from the Buffalo Trace portfolio I really liked. I think it was the Blantons.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Eagle Rare from them.
yeah, Eagle Rare was right up there too. But that was back when it was 12 years old, wasn't it? Or was
Yeah, I
it
think
10?
it was a 12 for a little bit. It's been a 10 for quite a while. So
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff. Anything more to say on that, or should I crack another window here?
I think we go to another window. And while
All
you're
right.
doing that, if you haven't looked ahead like Andrew, the rest of the calendar is bourbon, just for those of you that weren't aware.
Boutique Strathmill, 14-year batch 10. So
Mhm.
what have we got here? We've
Yeah,
got a
so
pretty label. It seemed to remember from the website.
yeah, I should actually bring that up, and I haven't been sharing the links. I'll have to do that in a bit. But here is the label. So the label features Goldilocks. Let's see if I can zoom in there. Maybe not. Saying still needs more gin. With 3 stills in the background, you can see a bear hiding back there. Of course, being worried about the trespasser in their home, as Goldilocks is like to do. Gin bottle that kind of looks like Gilby's gin on here as well, and then some bowls of oatmeal, just because that's what Goldilocks goes for.
And Goldilocks eats her oatmeal with gin in it, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the gin reference, as far as I can tell, is actually because, and I don't know if this is new or not, but there was a reference in the malt whiskey yearbook that kind of shocked me, saying that, and I couldn't find any backup on it anywhere, but saying that Strathmill is currently only producing gin, which is bonkers.
Interesting. For Diageo?
Yeah, don't know if that's the case, but the gin reference has to do with the prior owners of it, which were the creators of Gilby's Gin back in around the 1900s when they owned that.
Well,
Hmm.
there you go. Interesting. What do we make of the nose?
It's really nice and sort of grainy but floral with a bit of fruit on it.
Yeah. I'm getting like a, I don't know, like a macadamia nut butter, sort of like
Yeah.
not butter, but like macadamia nut butter on the nose.
Yeah, it noses like it's going to be on the creamier side of things because that like a little bit vanilla and chamomile driven as well.
Well, and it reminds me a little bit of some of those chocolates that our friend Frederica sends us every year from Rogers in Victoria.
Mhm.
And I'm not just saying that because she's on the chat and she's a sweet lady, but I don't know, maybe the marzipan, chocolate marzipan, maybe I don't know.
Maybe it's just a gin discussion, but I get a little bit of a gin herbaceousness on it.
Yeah, it does have those sort of like slightly green leafy notes in the background there.
I can see it's a touch vegetal, like
Yeah.
a little bit of like sauteed turnips and carrots on the palate.
Yeah. These are expensive ingredients though too. Like it's microgreens that you pay more for.
Nice creamy on the palate. Nice creamy tone.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's lush.
Yeah, a little bit of spice, but not overly spiced. Almost like the floral notes there, not quite into perfumey notes, but it does remind me of like that Gewürztraminer in style where you get the slight spice and the perfume notes at the same time.
Jen asking if the Day 12 blog got posted to Facebook.
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually don't know if it got posted to Facebook. I do have it
Facebook.
up on our site,
Good.
but
Actually,
Yeah, I got it off the
haven't
website.
actually.
yeah, let me check here.
There's quite a spice kick to this one too. A lot of oak spices on the palate. Strathmill's a distillery, just don't have a lot of frame of reference with. Like it's just not a whiskey we
Yeah.
see of.
Mhm.
Either from independent bottlings and certainly not official bottlings. I think we've only ever had one or two like OBs.
Yeah, there was the official 25-year-old that we had a while back, but even that, like I think we cracked one, but it's not. There's nothing profile, like it's not a bad whiskey, but there's nothing profile wise where like a Clynelish where you can say, oh, it's waxy, or yeah.
It's got to step up on Ben Rinnes though, because
Yeah.
unlike Ben Rinnes, I don't have sort of an immediate prejudice against it when I see the name. And I'm like, I'm probably not going to like that. Yeah, Strathmill, it's a curious one. Part of the biggest beverage company in the world. We just don't see it. As Evan said, we had a 25-year-old. I think maybe a decade earlier than that, there was another limited release of 25-year-old, but it's a distillery we don't see much of. And me even thinking like the Society, has the Society had many Strathmills?
A few lately, but nothing crazy. Like it is one of those distilleries where society wise, where I would have to look up the number every single time I see it. It just doesn't come to mind.
Well, there you have it. Cool. All right.
Mhm.
Anything more to say? Like, did you try adding water? I actually think that one for some reason might take water okay.
Yeah, try that. I do like the whiskey. It's again kind of like the waterfruit profile wise, where it's letting a lot of the grain do the work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's obviously refill a little bit on the naked side. But Frederica's saying she thinks it's Distillery 100.
Yeah, that sounds about right, actually.
Water doesn't really do it any harm. I'm not sure it helps it either though. So
Yeah, maybe a touch sweeter on the palate, but that's about it.
yeah. Still has that nice spicy, toasty, oaky profile on the back end. Lots of more grilled veg and all right. Day 14. I'm gonna pop this one out.
Perfect. While you're doing that, Chris Walker says one SMWS Strathmill since he joined. That was French Oak Roller Coaster, which I do recall. That was a pretty good one, linked into the spicier notes thanks to the French Oak finish.
We're going to the Wee Witchy. Gordon MacPhail Mortlock 15-year distillery label bottling.
Mhm.
It was fun to include a bunch more Gordon MacPhail bottlings this year, especially ones that, at least for a long time, we've not been able to offer in the calendar. I think at one point we probably did have the 15-year-old Mortlock in there, but that would have been back when it was a 43% bottling.
Yeah.
Before they kicked things up a notch. And you know, we've said some nice things already in this year's calendar tastings about Gordon MacPhail, but this whiskey to me is just an example of like how sort of on the right track they are with most of the things they do. They're consistently bottling better Mortlocks than Mortlock does. So
Totally.
Yeah.
Bon, I think that goes back to the sherry casts that they're getting as well, which we've talked about. Interesting thing about this one with the 43 versus 46, when I first did the tasting notes, I grabbed a bottle from the back shelf, did tasting notes up on that one, and then looked afterwards and realized it was a 43% version. So I had to go back and taste the 46% version at home. They are remarkably close, stylistically.
Well, it's funny because unlike most other companies, back when Gordon MacPhail did still do 43%, and I know that I think some of their releases, like the Discovery range, might occasionally still be 43. They don't do a full chill filtration the way that a lot of other companies do. They lightly chill filter. And what they mean by that is they're just trying to get rid of some of the, I think some of the bigger oils that might cause things to go cloudy and hazy. They're not looking to, I'm paraphrasing here, chill filter the shit out of it the way that some of the big beverage companies probably do. Well, what do we think on the nose? So Mortlock's a distillery that typically has a meaty profile, sometimes slightly sulfury. And to me, this is more in that leather, tobacco, dried fruits
Totally.
range.
Yeah.
Yeah, the meatiness isn't something that jumps right off on the nose for me. It does have this really cool, which I wasn't expecting, sort of citrus aspect to me, where it goes into a little bit of orange peel or even grapefruit on the nose as well.
It's quite bright.
Yeah. More orangey to me than grapefruit, but
Yeah. Yeah, my 43% version tasting notes, which I redid, actually had orange juice concentrate on the nose on that one.
Oh man, it's big, it's rich, loads of dried fruit. It's skirting around that like little bit of meaty muscular profile, but it's not overly present. It's quite soft and very fresh.
yeah, the sherry is not dominating the flavor for me.
No, no, it's got some remarkable balance.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it keeps getting richer, more chocolate, more tobacco, more leather, more spice. You know, the sherry is on one hand both a light touch, but as you know, Adam's commented there, more like you often get that sulfury meaty note coming through, and the sherry in this, although it's balanced, is bold enough to like hide that maybe less desirable spirit character or maybe tame it somewhat. Jeff saying not a Mortlocky Mortlock.
That needs to be on a movie poster.
Well,
quote.
I think I'd take these over the distillery bottlings.
Well, it seems to me like the 16 is pretty decent. It's been a while since I've had it. But I think they suffer from the fact, if I remember correctly, they're all 43%. So they're
43.8% alcohol, if I remember correctly. Which at that 0.8 is super important.
So crucial. Well, I mean, so is the 2.83 times distilled. Is that the current decimal that we're putting behind Mortlock's unusual distillation technique?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do that math, but it's interesting how they go about it. I did put a video that the Scotch Malt Whisky Society linked to a video that the SMWS made explaining that, which was pretty cool.
You know, and maybe this is my ADD and I don't have the patience to hear the explanation. But every time someone's tried to explain it to me, I think I've lost interest in the explanation before they get to the end of it. It's just too long. I mean, why can't they just do what Springbank does and call it 2.5 times distilled, even though it's also 2.7 something times distilled and not actually 2.5. They just round off. They make it easier. They let you know your simple minds like mine wrap their heads around it and just run with it.
Yep.
But I digress.
Yeah, I think the guy that came up with it, and keep in mind, he came up with it in the like 1896, I think, is when they adopted that or essentially created that style of doing the 2.881 or whatever it is, the way they do it, which is the guy must have been an amazing conspiracy theorist because he was able to bend his mind in ways that mine just don't bend.
Was he the one that predicted like over 100 years ago that Trump's second election would be stolen?
Yeah. Actually, it was Nostradamus that
That's incredible.
that created the 2.81 style.
All right. Before we open a rift between warring factions in this tasting, should we move on to day 15?
Sounds good.
I mean, perceived. You never know where the fault lines lie. I might have
That's right.
triggered something there.
Yeah, I know where the fault lies, just not the fault lines.
Exactly. I sometimes don't worry enough about where the fault lines are. Elements of Isla, CL14. There's a reason we wanted to put this in the calendar this year because this is the last time we're ever going to see distillery specific single cask or independent bottlings from Elements of Isla. Moving forward, they're going to be exclusively blended malts and including this CL14. So Hull Ela batch 14. Evan, what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this one is, if I recall correctly, I'll bring it up here. So yeah, 4 casks put together. Youngest distilled in 2012, oldest distilled in 2012, youngest distilled in 2015. 3 sherry butts, ex Oloroso, and then 1 American oak hogshead in the batch for this one, 50.1% alcohol.
You know, we've had this for a while, and this is probably my first time actually sitting down to nose and taste this. Unless I have a tasting note under there that I don't know about. I don't.
Nope.
Oh, I haven't done that. I mean, this is classic sort of sherry cask Hull Ela. There's some bacon in there. There's some scallops. There's a little bit of
yeah, plenty of like grilled shellfish for me, which is really cool. Still does have just a hint of the salted lime margarita notes that I get on ex bourbon and refill Hull Ela that are on the younger side.
Yeah. There's a nice chocolate with like a cayenne or chili infused spice.
Yeah, as Adam and Kate say, $85.
Yeah.
$86 actually, so it's more expensive than that.
I mean, it is sure it's a 500 mil, but you know, this whiskey, I think initially we only got 5 cases of it, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, do you want more? And I think part of that was just like other retailers just didn't quite know what to make of these little things and what they are. But I mean, those Elements of Isla bottlings have been consistently good the whole way along.
Oh yeah.
You know, we can talk about neurodivergent people. I know Oliver Chilton, who's like the head whiskey guy for Elixir. He fits into that category too, and he just does his own thing and has these cool ideas. Fortunately, I think he's got smart business managers to help rein him in at times.
Well, I was going to say nothing against Mark Renier, but I think I'd rather hang out with Oliver Chilton.
Oh, he's such a well. I mean, the whole Elixir's team are nice people.
Yeah.
You know, Oliver's got like cool ideas, but his boss Sikander, I think, will keep him in check at times. But so will guys like Chris Mabin and you know, Lily and a bunch of the other members on the team. And he is a good whiskey maker though, and you know it's exciting. He's got Tormore to work with now. I think he's building a house up near the distillery.
Cool.
Yeah, he's gonna have an Isla distillery to play with as well with Georgie.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
but
This is just, for me, just hitting all the right notes for a peated whiskey.
mhm.
It just,
Yep.
it's really well balanced, but I mean, the peat's there, but there's a lot of fruit coming in behind and
Yeah.
the little bacon notes.
Yeah. A little bit of
That's it.
chocolate and espresso on the finish
Yeah.
too, in a nice
I
manner.
mean, just unfortunate they're not gonna bottle single malts for, well, ever.
Well, yes, but like they've still
Yeah.
got their single malts of Scotland range.
Mhm.
They've still got Port Askeg. So there's
Yeah.
still
Trails.
lots of opportunity for us to see good bottlings. But it's the same problem that a lot of the big companies are having is that they're just having supply issues getting stock offers from the companies. And you know I think Diageo is comfortable selling them Kalila as long as they know it's not going to be bottled as Kalila. So
Mhm.
it's easy for them to guarantee a supply of a blended malt moving forward, whereas single malts, they can't really guarantee the supply. So,
Yeah.
and you know, like a lot of things, not everything lasts forever. The elements of
Yeah.
Isla, they were fun while we had them. There's always going to be something else down the line. And in 10 years' time, hopefully we're sitting around here talking about, you know, whiskey from Port Tentruan Distillery, which
Mhm.
like, thank God they picked such a hard name to pronounce and spell for their new Isla distillery. But you know, that's classic Isla. You got to have an
Yeah. I
unpronounceable.
think that's actually in the island of Isla's rider. Is
Yeah.
if you build a distillery there, it's got to be nearly unpronounceable.
You can't get planning permission without that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Bowmore was sort of grandfathered in on that one just because it's so old. So
Yeah, but it's Bowmore, not Pullmore.
yeah, that's right.
Bogmore, which means big reef. Incidentally, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Popular with the potheads then, eh?
Yeah, but
it's a
Ardbeg
different
is
kind of
pretty
reef,
easy.
though.
Yeah. Somebody's commenting Ardbeg's pretty easy, but we get a lot of customers asking for Ardberg.
Ardberg's
Yeah.
amazing. It's right up
Yeah.
there with Aberdelphi. You gotta
Yeah.
love Aberdelphi. There's some
Well,
other great ones out there.
yeah. Kurt came to the back last year. I remember like bending over in pain, and not because he's usually has pain in his stomach, but because someone asked him someone said with a straight face they were looking for Glenn Freud.
Amazing. There should be a Glen Freud. Maybe that's
Yeah.
like what they should call unpeated Lefroy.
Totally.
Glen
Yeah.
Freud. I support that. I totally support that. Glen
Bindinch. That's yeah.
Well, I don't know if I've mentioned him on the tastings here, but my friend Stevie Boy used to pronounce Bunahababulin, which is an immediate improvement on the original. It's an immediate
That's
improvement.
yeah, that was the best double barrel that Douglas Lang ever released of it, wasn't it?
Bunahababulin. All right.
Yeah.
Anything more to say about this other than that we really like it before we go to the speed round?
No, I think yeah, just a great dram.
All right. All right, Waterford, Heritage Hunter. Back to Funky Town.
Oh,
It's
so much like grist and grain there. That's and porridge notes. It's great stuff.
But also, Evan, you might get this hockey sock tape. Like when you're
Yeah.
pulling it and it starts to heat
Yeah.
a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is Griffin gets to this level of hockey sock tape sometimes in the amount he uses.
Well, and I think you combine that with a little bit of like the wet rubber hockey room floor mats where they're
Yeah.
like starting to get chewed up a little bit by the skates.
Yeah. Just a little bit of that hockey town sweat.
You know, the palate, say what you will about that funky nose. Palate, it's fruity, spicy, still funky, but it's a tasty whiskey.
Well, and you mentioned mash filters too, and it's got a bit of the greenness that you get on TNNX sometime. Like probably not due to the mash filter, but it just reminded me of that.
That what do they call it? The clear wort. You've got a
Yeah.
clear wort for fermentation. Cool. Paul Desnoyers is saying I basically live around the arena, so that is spot on. Super grassy second time around. All right. Where are we at? Prohibition, Old Forester,
Hmm.
1920.
Just is so mellow on the nose for me now.
It's dumpy, but like
Yeah.
not sherry
Good
dumpy,
dumpy.
bourbon
Yeah.
dumpy. It's like, you know, a batch of cookies before, like just after they get pulled out of the standing mixer. That
Yeah, the
chocolate
cookie dough. That's a good call. Yeah, it's the Glen Rothis of bourbon, I guess, but in a good way.
Makes me want an old fashioned.
Hmm.
Okay. Boutique. Strathmill.
Oh, so much like yeasty dough on the nose right now for me.
Yeah, I can see that. The nose I'm finding is a bit closed, especially after the last couple. A bit shy.
Mhm.
Or that could just be residual 10 days later COVID nose. It's pretty tasty.
Yeah, I like that palate.
Jen's taking shots at Chris, and I love it. I'm just gonna
I
go
think
back.
that the bourbon is still on my palate after trying to, have the Strathmill. So it's just that
Yeah.
I'm still getting the cherry notes from the bourbon.
I think
Yeah, Strathmill could have gone before the bourbon for sure.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's suffering a little bit from positioning there. And also, Jen was right to criticize Chris for needing new material. 100%. Just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, but this is Chris's best of tour.
Well, if I'd known, I might not have bought a ticket.
It's a little bit of like celery root right now on the nose on this one.
I can see that. All right, I'm already on to the Mortlick. Yeah,
That's what I'm talking about, actually. Yeah.
Oh, I was great. I was gonna say, like the finish on that Strathmill, to be fair, just keeps building. Like
Mhm.
it's definitely got some runway on it. For a very naked spirit-driven whiskey, it's got some runway.
Mhm. Best Strathmill I can remember tasting.
Not necessarily saying a lot though.
Yeah.
Oh man, Mortlick. I mean, that's class. That Mortlick profile, beautiful stuff. Soft, subtle sherry, like smooth leather, rich dark chocolate, nice fruits.
Yeah, it's not like it's definitely like along with that not having that sulfur, it's not like a just like exploding your mouth sherry bomb. There's quite a bit going on there because the
Lots of
sherry is a
that.
little bit more restrained.
I mean, without beating a dead horse, it's those Gordon MacPhail sherry casks. They're not
Mhm.
sherry seasoned casks like the rest of the industry uses. They're an attempt to replicate those sherry transfer casks that they're seasoned longer. That sherry that's in them takes out more of those easy to get, rougher flavor congeners.
Yeah. Thicker
And
staves too, isn't it? That they
thicker
use?
staves, yeah. So slower maturation, less oxidation. Yeah. I talked about this last night with Kurt and Evan in the Ben Romick tasting. I mean, one of the things to me that's so remarkable about Gordon MacPhail, Ben Romick, is that all the things that they've done so well with are like purposeful, long-term, thought out decisions. And like one thing that I only really reflected on recently was they bought Ben Romick in 93, but it took them 5 years to get it up and
Yep.
running. And it's not because they didn't want to get the distillery up and running, but it's because they wanted to make sure they did it right. And it's a company that doesn't rush things. It doesn't rush to decisions. But man, have they done some incredible things with their brands. And so it's cool to have a good representation of their products in the calendar this year, because we couldn't get them in 50 mils, and this was a way to showcase some really, really cool products that people should taste.
Well, you say it took them that long for Ben Romick. It essentially took him 82 years to build the cairn.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, nevertheless, all right, CL14, Elements of Isla, Pete Town. It's gone kind of chicken noodle soup to me on the nose.
Well, that's a good call. Yeah, a little bit of like oven baked ribs in there as well.
Mhm.
Miso soup, good call.
Maybe even like a lobster miso.
Mhm.
More scallops, more bacon, like really salty, thick cut English bacon. Yeah, it's great. Well, gents, this is probably the easiest tasting for me to pick my three favorites in. I know we only
Sam?
let Bruce have two, but we should probably get that poll going.
Yeah, absolutely. Launched here. There we go.
All right.
So while it's running, shall we start, Marty? Do you want to give your top three?
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to decide which ones first. I guess I really do like this Elements of Isla. I think we're gonna have to buy a bottle for that one.
Mhm.
Next for me is the Gordon MacPhail Mortlack.
Mhm.
And I do like the bourbon, but I think I'll have to, for number three, I'll have to take the Heritage Hunter. It just
Oh.
I found the nose just really kind of interesting and on a decent palate. So
Cool.
Andrew?
Evan, how about yourself?
So I'm gonna pick the bourbon. That's just a comfort zone for me. I really like this one. Knew exactly what I was getting into there, so that's no surprise. But second, I it's gonna be the Kalila, the Elements of Isla. And then third, I really like that Gordon MacPhail, but I'm gonna go with the Boutique Strathmill. That second time around, that palette is just kind of in my wheelhouse, is what I'm looking for.
Uh, I'm going number one, Mortlick. I mean, to me, there's just no
Mhm.
question. Number two is actually the Strathmill.
Yeah. I
It's
think
got
it's
some
getting
nice
better in the
flavors.
glass. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, to me, it's emblematic of the fact that boutique, and I think, we've talked about this in other tastings. Like, I think a lot of people struggle with the small bottles or the labels or both. But I've been consistently impressed with the quality of their whiskeys. And I think oftentimes also the value, but the values may be harder for people to see because it's in a strange size. And, maybe we don't list our prices based on milliliters. So, it's maybe not easy to compare apples to apples. But I quite like that. And as much as I like that CL14 and it's great, and incidentally, Marty, I think there's only about 7 bottles left. That Waterford Heritage Hunter it's a cool bottling. I really like it.
It is.
I think where I'm chasing these days are more subtle experiences. And as much as I like that Kalila, the Kalila is like a whack over the head.
Yeah.
Whereas this is something that needs a little patience and a bit of time.
Yeah, it's December, so you want to turn down the volume a little bit.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've had 28 of 29 people vote. So results. Heritage Hunter didn't get any votes on the first time around. G&M Mortlock took it with 13 votes. Second up was the Kalila, followed by the Old Forester. Pretty good spread on the second favorite. Heritage Hunter did get 3 votes there. Mortlock again took it, which I think is understandable. Again, a really balanced sherry dram. And then Elements of Isla, followed by a tie between Boutique Strathmill and the Old Forester.
I think there's something to be said for getting hit over the head when you're in the middle of December trying to deal with all the Christmas stuff going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, we
Yeah,
don't.
sometimes you just want the Enya playing in the background and your little sort of like Zen sand rake to rake stuff around. You don't need the volume turned up to 11.
Mhm. Well, I had a situation like that today where I was just like, okay, I was just like, I'm gonna have to stop you there. I'm happy to hear this out in January. Until then,
Mhm.
we're done. So, but anyway, well, guys, that was a good lineup. I don't know if anyone's got any
Yeah.
quick questions. Evan and I and potentially Marty have to run. We've got another tasting to do in 30-ish minutes. But if there's any questions or comments, we're happy to address quickly before we run that.
Yeah, the upside of us going a little bit quicker this time around is I've got time to redo my makeup in between. So
Ooh, that's good. I
mhm.
can polish my forehead, like make sure that it's not too shiny. Um, but no. Well, gentlemen, thank you for this. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for taking part in the tasting. Genuinely do hope you enjoyed it. We are doing this again one more time before Christmas and once after. So hope you'll join us if you're able. But until then, I hope you all have a great night. And we'll reconvene in 5 days to talk about 5 more whiskeys. And we're going to have a special surprise guest. So
Yeah,
you'll have to tune in
that
to
one's
see.
gonna be fun.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll talk soon.
Take care, guys.
Right.